Welcome to Hardman Fishing Adventures Wishing We Were Fishing podcast. A podcast where we wish we were fishing, but instead we're recording a fishing podcast. In our first episode, we're going to tell the story of two of the biggest trout we've ever seen. Both stories we've never told anyone outside of a few close friends. Also, bear with us. This is our first ever podcast, and I can't promise it'll be perfect. But we'll work through the kinks as we go and hopefully bring you a high-quality podcast full of cool stories, behind-the-scenes info, and tips and tricks that help us catch fish. If you enjoy it, please like the video and leave a comment on YouTube and leave a review on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Alright, let's get into the first episode of Wishing We Were Fishing. Alright guys, welcome to a brand new podcast. So my name is John Hardman, and I'm with my brother Andrew Hardman. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello.
And we run the YouTube channel called Hardman Fishing Adventures. Some of you have probably watched it if you're listening to this podcast. We don't even know the name of this podcast yet, by the way. So as you're listening to this, you know the name of the podcast, but at the time of this recording, we have no idea what we're calling this YouTube, or not YouTube channel. We don't know what we're calling this podcast. We originally wanted to start this podcast. We called it something like Die by the Fly or something. Remember that?
Was it? I
think so.
Vaguely remember that name, but...
Yeah, because I think Micah came up with that name and we kind of ran with it, and then we never actually recorded the podcast, which I think is funny.
And we also kind of wanted to be more on brand with HFA, so like HFA something with that podcast, but we'll have to see. We haven't decided. We'll probably decide in the next handful of days. So hopefully before this comes out. Well, it has to be before it comes out. So
yeah, we don't have a choice. It's definitely going to be before this comes out. We will decide the name. But I was talking to Andrew before we started this podcast about how I don't think any of the comments and the thousands and thousands of comments that we've gotten on the YouTube channel over the years, I don't think one singular person has asked us to start a podcast. So that brings me to the first part of this podcast, I guess, which is just that, just the reason for us even starting the podcast. And for me personally, I just wanted like a long form outlet to like tell stories and answer questions. So, generally, when we're going out and we're fishing and stuff, I mean, even like in a regular YouTube video, we might fish for like 6 or 8 hours, and then we, cut that down to like 20 minutes. And yeah, we pick out the highlights and stuff, but just in general on YouTube, it's kind of like a shorter form of content than a podcast would be. So that's part of the reason. I also wanted to be able to answer questions, because sometimes we get questions like over and over and over and over again. And I might respond to one comment and tell them or answer their question, but sometimes we see like questions constantly all the time.
Yeah, and if it's the same question too, then we can like just refer people, oh, check out this, and we explain all about it and talk about it instead of just which, I mean, I'm sure the questions will still be there, but just to give people another outlet to see some longer form, answer questions. And it's tough on a video too, as you're out like on the creek doing fishing. It's tough to fully explain and articulate your thoughts because you're distracted, you're trying to fish, you're trying to do this or that. So it's tough to completely answer questions unless you do like a voiceover, but then at that point, let's just put it into a longer form content and actually explain it a little better.
And Andrew and I, we literally will make phone calls and talk for like 2 or 3 hours at a time sometimes. So like, it's not really a big deal for us to like talk about some of this stuff in podcast form. And plus, as I said, we could answer questions. And then there's a lot of like untold stories, which is what this podcast is going to be about. Some of our like really, really big fish untold stories. Andrew's going to tell a story about an enormous rainbow trout. And I'm going to tell a story about an enormous brown trout that I named Poseidon.
Well, and it's also just the fact too that as we're making these videos, we don't put a lot of the trout we catch on there, just because if we go a day and only catch a trout or not any trout at all, but we have a cool experience, that doesn't get uploaded because nobody cares to watch a video about like a single trout that was only this big, or we don't catch anything, but we lost a 30-inch trout. We can't really upload that, but we can still talk about it to some of the people who care to listen to that type of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And just different stories that another thing that happens a lot is like I might catch a really big brown trout, but like there's like a street sign in the video footage, like a dead giveaway, like spot burn. It's like, obviously I'm not going to post that video.
Yep. There's been quite a few of those over the years. Like, oh, we caught this like 24-inch brown trout. It's beautiful, but it's like this street sign or this obvious landmark is like in the background, and we can't really upload that. So it just gets taken down, and maybe we post a picture of it, but that's about as far as that fish ever gets. So
yeah, exactly. And it's just like, I mean, I have like literally like a whole folder in my hard drive that's just of fish that I've caught and wasn't able to use in a YouTube video, or just ongoing stories with fish that I've lost or seen multiple years in a row but haven't caught and stuff, which are all things that would be fun to talk about on a podcast. So this is kind of like a behind the scenes stuff for, like, I guess the real fans or just people who are interested in general and like what we're doing, on a day to day, or what kind of trips we're taking, or even stories about our trips. Like we got a trip we're about to go to Tennessee, and then I'm going to be going to Oregon, and then I've got a trip up to Erie. So all these trips we'll be able to talk about and kind of in long form, and maybe with some guests we'll be able to talk about all these things.
Yep. So basically it'll just be kind of a mix between stories of our own, some tips and tricks, like answering questions from you guys, and just the behind the scenes of our lives and our trips we're planning on taking, and maybe asking you guys as well, places that you would like us to see us go, and so on. So
exactly. So I'm just going to go over quickly how this podcast is going to be run now, this time, and into the future. So we're going to start off with like a quick introduction of who's on the podcast, because I do plan on having guests from time to time. It's usually just going to be me and Andrew, but I've got some people that I think would be good guests. Plus, we might just have friends on here. Like if we go to, like this year, we kind of want to go to Idaho. If we go to Idaho and our buddy comes along with us, obviously our buddy might be a guest on the podcast. So things like that. So we're going to start off, with introductions. Then we're going to answer some questions from you guys. So the questions I'm going to get from the YouTube video, because to my knowledge, you can't leave questions on Spotify or Apple. So I'm starting a whole new YouTube channel. It's going to be called whatever the name of this podcast is that we don't know, HFA's something podcast. And I'm going to have like these YouTube videos, and these YouTube videos are going to be somewhat unique. At least I think so, in that I'm going to be showing like uncut GoPro footage or just fishing footage of me and Andrew fishing while the podcast is going on. So if you're listening to this podcast on YouTube right now, which would be awesome if you were, if not, if you're on Apple or Spotify, doesn't matter. But if you are watching it on YouTube, you can watch us fish the whole time. And a lot of it, maybe us catching nothing, or maybe we're slaying out. I don't know.
Hopefully we're catching a fish right now.
Yeah, maybe I'm literally catching a fish right now and releasing it. Who knows? But a lot of that footage is going to be never before seen footage, obviously, because these podcasts might run an hour or something. And like, I don't have hour-long videos on the YouTube channel much, or there's not many of them. So yeah, it's a cool idea. I want to see how it does. It'll be interesting to see if people can figure out how many fish we catch during the like uncut footage and stuff. I don't know. There could be some fun games we do with that too, but leave comments on the YouTube channel, because those comments in the YouTube channel or on the YouTube video are going to be the ones that we answer on the podcast. So like, yes. If you have a question like, what rig do you use when you're Euro nymphing, or what's your favorite state to fish, or whatever questions you guys have.
Streamer fishing or types of fish, just anything you could ask.
Anything, doesn't matter. Leave those comments on the YouTube video and we will answer them. We'll pick out a couple and we'll answer them. And then after we answer some comments or some questions, I should say, they're not comments. We're going to go into like story time. And the story time could be, as we said earlier, big trips, could be untold stories of big fish. It could be anything. It doesn't really matter. It depends on what we're planning on doing for this, whichever particular podcast that we're recording. So that's generally how it's going to run, and then it's going to be over by then, hopefully, unless we're still rambling for too long. But so it's just going to be introduction, answer questions, story time, and then we'll wrap it up and be done after that.
And just before we actually start into those questions and stories, Just bear with us for at least the first maybe handful of episodes as we get the quality down and even just talking in general. Like
Yes.
just bear with us through especially the first ones. So if you get very annoyed by hearing us the first few episodes, you can skip a few and then maybe join like 5 episodes later down the road, and hopefully our qualities increase some. So if you get really annoyed, just I get it. Just skip a few, and hopefully we'll be better after a handful of episodes. So
Yeah, we have no idea what we're doing.
Sorry as we're trying to get this down. The quality, I don't know how good like the audio is exactly and everything else. So we'll just see how it kind of goes, and hopefully our quality will increase as we go along. So bear with us.
Yeah, if the quality is absolutely garbage, then I won't even post this recording and you'll never hear from it again. But if it's at least decent, then we'll probably post it, and then we'll just improve as we go, like we did with the YouTube channel. If you want to watch my first few videos, they weren't very good either. And now the videos I think are pretty, at least halfway decent, you know? So it'll probably be the same thing with the podcast, but we're just going to have fun with it and see where it takes us. All right, Andrew, you ready to answer a few questions?
Yeah, and I'll start this first question, and I guess I'll ask you.
Okay.
So we've gotten this question many, many times, and it's about streamer fishing. And the question is, what weight rod do you usually use for streamer fishing? Having a tough time deciding between a 6-weight and a 7-weight rod. So you can start with that.
Yeah, so when we first started streamer fishing, I think both of us just used a 5-weight because that's the only rod we had. And the 5-weight worked for us for a long period of time until we started to like consistently catch slightly larger fish. And when you start catching like fish like 20 plus inches, a 5-weight very quickly becomes a little bit tedious or a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit undergunned for some really big fish. And I think my next streamer rod I bought was an 8-weight. So I like kind of overshot and went to like the high end of what I would consider like you would even use for streamers and trout. And that was mostly because at the time I was fishing some bigger water, and I still do, but we were making trips to like the White River and stuff like that. And we were just looking for like 30-inch fish, which when I did catch the 130-inch fish, having that 8-weight was amazing. Like it felt perfect. Like I was glad I had it. But at the same time, 90% of the fish you catch, you know, they ain't that big. And like, for example, you catch an 18-inch fish on an 8-weight and it's not nearly as fun as it could be. So since then we both, Andrew, do you use a 7-weight right now?
Yeah, I currently use a 7-weight. I think that's pretty good. And I would honestly suggest probably a 6-weight for like just your first time streamer fishing, unless you plan on fishing like something like the white or some other big river system. Just because a 6-weight, especially in like smaller streams like out east and stuff, like you really don't need any more than that. But I have I'm a 7-weight, partly because out here in Colorado, like I am hunting for a 30-inch brown trout, and I've seen them, and everything else. So it's like I'm kind of like just below an 8-weight because I still want the fun of catching a 20-inch brown trout, but I want to have that oomph behind the rod if I do hook a 24, 28-inch brown trout. So it kind of depends on like your goal for fishing, obviously, but I would say if you're mainly just fishing smaller creeks and streams, I would go with just the 6-weight. But if you just are trying to fish everything, I would just go for the 7-weight personally.
Yeah, and so my streamer rod, as it sits right this moment, is a 6-weight actually. And I chose a 6-weight because a lot of the water, so just a little background, I live out east in West Virginia. Andrew lives in Colorado right now. So we have kind of two unique perspectives on what we'd want in a streamer rod. I went with a 6-weight, and that's what I've been using for a while now because a lot of the water I fish is just smaller. And to be honest with you, most of the brown trout I'm going to catch are going to be in that 20-inch range, which a 6-weight is perfect for. It's still fun to fight them. I'm not like ripping a 20-inch brown trout out of the water or anything crazy. A 6-weight can still handle most of the flies that I throw, even some of the bigger flies. So it's worked out well. The other thing for me is like a 6-weight rod and reel combo is way lighter than an 8-weight. And throwing an 8-weight rod around all day with streamers can get really tiring too. So that's another thing that I take into consideration.
Yeah, that's definitely not fun to have to throw any weight around, and it also just kind of takes away the fun, as you were saying, of catching those 18, even up to like 20-inch brown trouts. Just kind of become not as exciting. So yeah, I would highly recommend like just a 6-weight unless you are planning on fishing a more broader spectrum of. I do fish like I fish areas quite often that very consistently have upper 20s brown trout up to 30 inches and even above that. So I want that rod. But if you're fishing like 80% of the time in areas that the biggest brown trouts are like mid 20s, I would just stick with the 6-weight.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the answer to that question is like, how big of a fish do you think you're going to catch? And where are you fishing? Like if you're fishing out east and you're fishing water that realistically you'll never see a fish over 24 inches, then use the 6-weight. If you're fishing like big tail waters or big river systems where you think you could catch a 30-inch brown, then go with the 7 or 8-weight. Have fun with it. But yeah, I think that's really what it comes down to, is what kind of water are you fishing and what kind of fish do you think you're going to catch? All right, I'll ask the second question, Andrew. You ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay, so what streamer line do we use? Like what streamer fly line do we use? I see this question asked all the time.
I'd honestly have to find a box to tell you the exact name of it, but it's just the Cortland streamer line. I don't know if it has some fancy name to it or not, but
I don't think it does.
We just use the streamer, the Cortland streamer line that they have, and I haven't had any problems with that at all. So,
I think
most of the streamer lines out there are perfectly fine. But we personally, for our stuff, use the Cortland. Have been using the Cortland streamer line at least. So,
well, I think the big thing in this question, or the big answer for this one, is that we use floating line. We don't use sinking line for streamers.
Well, maybe I misread that question. I thought you were just saying, like, what do you use?
Do use the Cortland streamer line. We do use the Cortland streamer line, but we use their floating streamer line.
You're right. So I misread that. I thought it was like, what streamer line are you? I just used the Cortland streamer. But I see like sinking, floating, sink tip. You're right.
Yes.
Let me re-answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah, we use
part
the...
two. What streamer line do you use, Andrew?
I use... lead weight on my line. Hopefully sinks all the way to the bottom and I get stuck. Now I've always started out, and we always kind of started out with the floating line, and we've kind of stuck to floating line. I think the only time we've ever switched off of floating line is like at the White River, like other big like tail water places. Like then I think we've switched to intermediate line, but especially for like smaller creeks or like any kind of place that isn't like you're fishing something huge, I don't really see a problem with floating line. And if you're trying to get it down, like if you're trying to get your stream down a bit more, I just use a heavier streamer personally. So I just can stick with a line throughout. Basically everything I fish is the same line, same floating line. And I just kind of switch the weight of my streamer personally, but
yeah, I agree with that. We do use floating line, obviously, but I'd like to add a little bit more to that. He said we started out with floating line. We did because, like every other fly angler on Earth, we all started out with one rod, and we used the one rod for nymphing. We used it for streamer fishing. We used it for everything, and we just started out using floating line. But now, the longer we've fished, the more we've stuck with floating line. And we have used sinking line, like sink tip line, in like some of our home waters before. And I'll give you a couple reasons why I don't like it. And this is in a streamer fishing video on YouTube. But one of the reasons I don't like it is because it kind of like limits what you can do with the streamer. Like if you throw a sinking line, once that line hits the water, that line is going down current. So your fly can only go one direction, and that's down the creek or down the river. Whereas when you have floating line, I can make a roll cast underneath a tree and then mend the line upstream, and that streamer is going to run upstream. And so you can kind of like change the direction the streamer goes. Even like as simple as like when the fly comes up like close to your feet, you can like mend the line again and make the streamer change directions a couple times, which a lot of times is like what gets the fish to eat. And you just can't do that with sinking line. So I'm with Andrew. We usually throw floating line. You're able to control the streamer a lot more. And then not only do you control the streamer a lot more, but it just, I don't know. We're kind of used to throwing it at this point too.
And I agree. And that's a great point. It's much easier to move your streamer around. And also, you also just don't get like stuck on the bottom nearly as much if you're throwing floating line, because you can easily control like how deep your streamer is. With sinking or intermediate line or any of those sink tip, you're just kind of at the mercy of the line. And like if you cast like with floating line, I can cast over top of a log and still bring my streamer over top of the log. If I don't have that, I'm stuck on that log or rock every cast. So I can like cast in more places. It's easier to deal with the streamer. So yeah, I prefer floating line, and we've been throwing floating line. And I'd say really the only exception to that is if we do fish some giant river like the White. So
yeah, or like we're going to be fishing some tailwaters this weekend in Tennessee. We'll probably throw some sinking line there maybe, because they're, when you got like this really big holes, big water, that's when we use it most. So I guess now we'll go on to the story portion. So we've got two stories we want to tell, which I kind of alluded to at the beginning of this, and probably is the title of the podcast. But one of them is, I'm going to tell the story of Poseidon, which was a fish that was incredibly large, probably the second largest brown trout I have ever landed. And I say probably because I didn't get a good measurement on it, which is exactly what you're going to hear in the story. And then Andrew's going to talk about the biggest trout we've ever seen, the untold story of the biggest trout we've ever seen.
And I'm already going to throw some shade on John here, because I'm pretty sure I even said before he went out that he should fix his net, or I think I brought something up about the net, because I told him like I've had, which I don't want to spoil anything, so I won't really say anything, but I've had this happen before with other fish, and I was like, you want to watch out for that, and he was like, it's fine. And this is what I hear after that, so you can go now.
Yeah, it was not fine. But okay, so the story of Poseidon, and the story, the reason I'm comfortable telling this story is because I think the story's come to an end now. I mean, it's been 3 or so years since this all transpired, so the fish is likely dead now just because of how big it was. It had to have been near the end of its life anyways. But just for a little context of like the area where Poseidon lived, there's no lakes that this fish runs out of. It's the biggest one that I see a lot of people say, like, that's a lake run fish. There's no lakes these fish run out of.
Yeah, we do see quite a few, like we catch like a 26, 28 inch trout, and like that had to come from a lake, and I was like, there isn't a lake or ocean in this. There's that doesn't exist where we fish in some of these places. So like these are all stream born, and they grow up in the stream that they're in for most time. And now out here in Colorado, that isn't the case, but out east, a lot of times that is the case, unless we're fishing on special fisheries that can support that. But sorry, continue.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I was going to say is, just for context, there's no lakes, no rivers these fish, not no rivers, sorry, that's silly. No lakes these fish run out of. They don't run out of the ocean. There's no ocean, obviously. And then the other thing that's worth mentioning is these are 100% wild, stream-born fish. There's no stocking anywhere near this. I mean, I'm not even sure if the system is stocked. It might be stocked in somewhere like 100 miles away. I don't know, but like within reason, there's no stocking that's done on this. These sections of water that we're going to be talking about. So that's just for context. And then the other thing for context is that I don't know where you're listening to this podcast from, but in the area where this particular story of Poseidon takes place, or even the region that this story takes place in, like most people go their whole lives without even catching a 24-inch brown trout. Just being honest, most anglers do. Like to catch a fish that's over, let's say like that 25, 26 inch range is like Me and Andrew called them like mega giants. We call them upper 20s fish. We call it like they're essentially unicorns. It takes like a very special set of circumstances of like good water for a long periods of time, lots of food for the fish to eat. It takes a particular kind of fish that's just quite literally built different to even get to this size, let alone the fact that they have to live for a decade or more to get to that size. So they truly are, it is incredible to catch a fish over like 25 inches. That's like almost unheard of, like difficult to do.
And I would say for like brown trout, at least, if you catch or any brown trout like that's hitting over like around 26 inches, that's like a very hard to find fish. Like even in Colorado, like hitting a brown trout over 26 inches is like, you're not doing that every year or every 2 years even. I mean, some people do just because they know the exact places to fish. Like, oh, this is like, there's always some big ones in here and stuff. But it's like anything over like 26 inches is just a giant brown trout anywhere. And it's just a really special fish. I feel like I was going to say something more. I had something more in my mind, but I lost it. So just keep going.
Well, no, you're right. Like that's what I'm trying to hit at, is that like a mega fish of these like gigantic calibers, like they do not exist very often. Very rarely do they exist. So the story of Poseidon, which is one of those fish, that's part of the reason this is so special. But so basically I was fishing a stretch of water on a creek that we fish or have fished for years and years and years. And this particular stretch of water, I would not say is the best stretch of water. Despite the fact that it looks pretty good, rarely have we done well on this particular section of water. And that's just to lay the groundwork, a little bit of context for the stretch of water that I caught this fish. But the hole that I caught the fish in is a very unique hole for this system. This particular area doesn't really have any high gradient. There isn't very high gradient. So a lot of the holes are created by big boulders or down trees or something along those lines. And this particular hole sets up almost as a plunge pool, which is kind of a rarity. And it's very, very deep, and it's got this crazy swirling current. And if the water is at all high, it's almost impossible to fish. And it's even nearly impossible to fish even when the water's low. It's hard to fish just because the water swirls and it kicks flies out of there like nobody's business. And it's one of those holes that for years and years and years, me and Andrew have fished it, and we've said, man, one day there'll be a big fish in here and we'll catch one, but it just hadn't happened.
It's also a thing where like we know that there's probably is a big fish in there. You just can't cast to where you need to cast to even catch it because the current's too strong. It's this and that. So
there's multiple holes like that. And I mean, everybody knows like the holes that we're thinking of. Like everybody has this type of hole in their body of water or their favorite body of water where it's like, you have this big, deep, twisted hole with a giant root wad and everything. And you're like, I know there's a giant trout in there, but you can't catch it. It doesn't matter if it's in there or not. But anyways, on this particular day, it was like, I think it was the very beginning of June. And I was fishing up this stretch of water, kind of as like a last ditch effort of sorts. And I came up to this particular hole that I'm talking about. And the water was actually pretty low. It had been low, but it had just rained. So it bumped up a little bit and it was a little bit off colored, but the actual volume of water coming down the creek was not that high. So it was kind of higher than it had been, but still low and a tad bit off colored. And I come up to this hole and, not super high confidence in it is what it is. But I was going to fish it because I stopped at that stretch of water. And I made one cast up into the hole and I'm casting upstream, working the streamer downstream. And just the way the current was at that particular CFS, the current was kind of pushing up against this like rock wall of sorts. It's not really a rock wall, but it is a rock, but it's not really a wall. It's hard to describe, to be honest with you, but the water was pushing up against this like ledge essentially. And I came up there and I was like, man, it sure looks like a spot where you'd catch a big brown trout. And I made a cast in there and nothing happened. Made another cast in there, nothing happened. Made another cast in there, nothing happened. I don't know how many casts I made, but it was like I had lost hope. So not only did I not have any hope in the hole to begin with, but now I've already made a dozen casts in this hole. So now I really have no hope. And then one of the times I worked the streamer into my feet, I just turned the streamer. So I turned the streamer 180 degrees and started working it up the current right at my feet. And I got maybe 1 or 2 bounces in that on the streamer, kind of working it up the current. And then like a Leviathan from the depths, like I can't see into the water, but I'm looking down at my streamer, like right at my feet. And I just see the jaws of one of the biggest brown trout I'd ever seen. Still, I think weight wise would have been the biggest brown trout I'd ever caught. Comes out of the water, fully airborne, by the way, to the point where no part of this fish is in the water, and then just belly flops, splashes right at my feet, and disappears back into the depths of the hole. Completely missed the streamer. I set the hook, and I didn't feel a single thing. Completely missed the streamer. Essentially just smacked the streamer, and accomplished nothing other than jumping clear out of the water. And I lost my mind. I mean, I jokingly said that the trout like drenched me when it hit the water again because it was so big and it made such a big splash that water went everywhere. And so I parked my butt there and I just casted for another 15, 20 minutes with the streamer. But a lot of times what happens, and I knew this had happened, but like I still had to sit there and cast anyways because of how big the fish was. And a lot of times when those fish like move such like long distances for a streamer, they essentially spook themselves. Like they come out of cover so far, and then once they realize what they've done, they spook. I've seen it many, many times before. A big brown trout will follow a streamer out of a log jam or something, get halfway out into the creek or river, and then they'll sit there for a second, and then they're like, what am I doing out here in the middle of the day? And then they shoot back underneath wherever they came from. And I guarantee that's what this fish did. He went airborne. He realized he'd made a grave error, and she flew right back into the water and went way back into the bottom of the hole where she'd come from. I lost my mind. I think I told Andrew, I was like, that was a 30-inch fish. If like it could be a 30-inch fish, like legit. And the thing that I remember about this fish is not that how long it was, but how thick it was. Like if you guys have ever seen like those really big, like white river brown trout that people catch, that they're like as big around as they are long. That's what this fish looked like to me. It was a very silvery looking brown trout. Not much color to her, but like as fat as can be and long. So what I did, and I talked to Andrew about it at the time, and one of the things we'd had success with in previous years is coming back and nymphing for fish if we knew there was a big brown trout in a hole. Because a lot of times those holes are set up such that like the cover that those fish are using are either like undercut rocks or ledges, or whatever it may be, but it's mostly the depth of the hole and how difficult it is to fish that has kept those fish alive for so long. So I talked about it with Andrew, and he's like, yeah, you should go back and nymph it like really hard and try to catch the fish on a nymph. And so I think that was like a Saturday that I moved that fish before dark. And I went out the next day and was nymphing for it. And I nymphed for it for a long time. Didn't catch anything. Well, it's not true. I did catch another brown trout or something, but nothing super big. And essentially failed, went on fish the rest of the day. Didn't really catch much or nothing of note. Maybe I did. I don't remember. And then I left, worked the full week. And then I came back the next Saturday. And the next Saturday I came back and the water was a good bit lower and a little bit clearer, which was just better nymphing water to begin with. And I basically sat up there and I started nymphing. And I changed nymphs. I must have changed nymphs many, 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 many times. And it was like a tricky run to fish or tricky hole because, as I said, like the way the water kicked out of that hole, like it was so hard to get your nymphs down to where I figured the fish was going to be. So I had to use like pretty big nymphs to get down there, to even get to where I thought the fish was going to be. But what I ended up doing is I put on like a really big, like Pat's rubber leg type stonefly that was really, really heavy, that I was essentially using as an anchor fly to like cut through the current. And then I switched to like it was like maybe a size 18, like pheasant tail type fly. I don't remember exactly what it was, but a really small, like 18 or 20 fly for the tag nymph. I was Euro nymphing, and I'm casting in this hole, like 1 cast, 2 casts, 3 casts, 4 casts. And all of a sudden, one cast through there just goes, it just stops dead. And I set into it, and Andrew knows this feeling all too well. You set into it, and you're like, I could be stuck or I could have a fish. And I'm sitting there with the rod doubled over, just waiting for any type of movement. And then I just feel what feels like a half head shake. And it's like, all right, I've hooked something, and it is not moving, and it's on the bottom of this hole. And I was like, I've hooked the fish. Like immediately, I was like, I've done it. I've hooked it. Now I'm in for like the fight of my life. Because I was using like a 3-weight Euro rod, So I went from using like an 8-weight that I could have, fairly readily got the trout in pretty easily to like throw in a 3-weight with 4X or whatever I was using. So all of a sudden I knew I was like kind of screwed, but in a good way. Like I was happy to have hooked the fish. So I fought the fish for a long time. The fish actually ended up going to the tail out of the hole, and I fought it for a long time there. I say a long time, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer. I don't exactly know. I think the fight in total lasted around 10 minutes. And that was like me really pushing it, trying to get the fish in. But what happened is he was in the tail out of the hole, or she was, and I eventually tried to net her because she wasn't really doing anything. Like a brown trout that big is really good at just sitting in the current, and I could see the fish clear as day with my eyes, but she was just sitting in the current with her head down and her body kind of facing towards the bottom of the creek. And every once in a while, when I started to step up to her, she'd just do one little kick of her tail and just get out of my reach a little bit further. And finally, one time I swung for her, and she avoided me and shot down the creek or river, and I took off after her. I mean, I ran down the creek, and I'm running, and I get to the next hole, and the next hole is not much better. It's not very big, or it wasn't very big at the time. I don't know what it looks like now. It wasn't very big at the time, so I knew the fish probably wasn't going to stay there for very long. But I tried to net her again, took off down to another hole. So at this point, I've run, I want to say 50, 60, 70 yards. I don't know, a good distance. Like I'm 2 holes down below where I had originally hooked the fish. And finally, the fish is kind of starting to wear out a little bit. And I don't want to fight the fish to complete exhaustion if I can avoid it. So I kind of pushed the envelope a little bit. I remember like really putting pressure on the fish to get it into the net and thinking like, if this fish pops right now, I'll throw up in my mouth. Like, because it was just like, I'd worked so hard, so unbelievably hard. And then finally, I got the fish's head to turn just a little bit, swing the net under, land the fish. And I just look at the fish. I'm like, oh my goodness, I've done it. I have like successfully done what like not many anglers say that they get to do like in their lifetimes fishing in the, this region of the country. And, for context, that year I had caught a 26-inch brown trout that I had taped out. I maybe like several weeks prior, maybe a month prior, I'd caught a 26-inch brown trout that I had taped. And this fish in the net was several inches bigger than that. I to this day say that the fish was probably in the 28-ish inch range, but like give or take an inch. It could have been 27, could have been 29. I don't know. And the reason I don't know, and the reason there's not a picture of this fish, and the reason that really there's not much proof of this whatsoever is that, and Andrew alluded to this at the beginning of the video, but I landed the fish and I look around and I have nothing. I have the net and my rod, but all my camera gear, everything I need to take the picture, the tape measure, everything is 2 holes back up the river. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, what do I do? And I was like, I could try to leave the fish here in the net, but I was scared to death to leave the fish in the net and just walk off without it. Because like, I'll come back here, that fish will have kicked, and he'll have the net, my rod, and everything swimming down the river. So I was like, I can't do that. That risks the fish lice. That risks the fish's well-being, which I didn't want to do. I was like, the only thing I can do is like try to bring this fish up the river with me. So I kept it in the water. I'm like squatted over in the water, like essentially like you almost look at it as like reviving the fish almost, because I'm like moving the fish up the creek or up the river. But I get up to a certain point in this run between holes where I have to lift the fish out of the water for a brief second because it's like white water coming down the creek. So I have to lift it out of the white water to get it up into the slow current so I continue to walk this fish up the river. And I picked it up, and I remember, and Andrew mentioned this too, but the net that I had at the time, the basket of the net had a few holes in it. And it's this like rubber net. And it had 1 or 2 holes in it that were decently sized, but not big enough that like a 30-inch fish could fit through, obviously. And I lift up the fish, and it's heavy as lead. Like it was definitely the heaviest fish I've ever hooked. And I pick up the net, like both hands, like one side of the net, and one hand on the front of the net and one hand on the handle. I pick up the fish. The fish is tripled over in the net, and I run as fast as I can. I go jump, jump, jump up to the next pool. And as I'm getting up to the pool, right over the slack water, and I start to drop the fish down towards the water, it makes one big flop. And when it makes the big flop, I saw its head pop in to like, it's got its nose in one of the holes of the net. And in my mind, I saw it and I was like, well, that's not ideal, but I'm going to drop it in the water and I'll just put my hand in front of its nose and I'll push it back in the net. It'll be fine. I'll just have to watch that. But as I got it into the water, it's like the fish was so big and weighed so much and it had so much strength in its body still, even after being fought for 10 minutes, is that once it got right down to the water, it's like it sensed it was close to the water again and it made one big flop. I watched the hole in the net just rip and gouge into like a hole that was double the size of the fish. And obviously I'm going down to the water already and I'm just watching the fish like rip the hole as I'm putting it in the water. And then of course, as soon as that fish hit the water, it slid through the hole and was sitting in like, 6 inches of water on this little swirl pool in this current. And I looked at it for a second and I literally dove head first, like into the water trying to catch the fish. And I felt like I touched the fish's tail with my left hand as I tried to like put the net in front of its face. And as soon as I touched that fish, whoosh, disappeared. It swam into that hole so quick, like it had never even been hooked. And then I just sat there. I literally looked around. I didn't know whether to like cry, laugh, puke. Like I wanted to drown myself. Like I didn't know what to do in that situation other than to just say that like I had completely failed. And like I didn't know. The worst part is like I don't have a picture of the fish. I do have GoPro footage of me fighting it that's still on this computer to this day of the whole fight and the whole catch. But I didn't take any pictures. I don't have a measurement on the fish. Like if I didn't have the GoPro footage that I could watch every now and again, I would probably not even think that the fish was real. But it was genuinely probably, I would say it would probably end up being the second biggest fish lengthwise that I'd caught. And certainly the biggest fish weight-wise that I'd caught. And so anyways, that happens. And I had like this weird moral dilemma where I was like, I thought that there was a good chance that like it wouldn't have been impossible for me to go back and catch that fish again. Like just go back there with a nymph repetitively over and over and over and over and over again until I caught it again. But I kind of almost felt bad about that because I'd already bested the fish. Like I'd already caught it for legally, like all intents and purposes, I caught the fish. And the only thing that I really didn't get was a picture and a proper tape measure or like a measurement on it. So in my mind, I was like, I caught the fish. I'm going to leave the fish alone. Like, congrats, you win. Like, we both got what we wanted, so to speak. Like, I got to catch this incredible, like, once-in-a-lifetime unicorn brown trout. And, but, like, the fish got released fine and everything like that. So I ended up leaving it alone. Didn't really try to, I'm not saying I never fished the hole that year again, but, like, I didn't really, like, put any effort into it. And then the craziest part is like, the following year, I didn't have nearly as much time to fish down there. But the following year, I went back to that hole. And one rainy day, I think it was in May, I'm going up and I'm fishing through that hole and the water's roaring pretty fast. And I'm like, I'm going to go through this hole because in my mind, I'm like, Poseidon still lives in here somewhere. Like it's not a dead fish. It's still alive. I watched it swim off. Granted, in a different hole. I released it in a different hole, but the fish can move holes like nobody's business. They don't care. And I go up to fish the same hole that Poseidon was in, and I go up there and I put on the biggest streamer I had because the water was kind of off colored and pretty high. And I was like, I'm gonna throw. I had it was like a triple articulated sex dungeon, like it was a donkey of a streamer. And I throw that streamer in there, and one of those casts, I'm swinging it around, and dang, if that stupid fish, I know it's the same fish too because there's not that many big fish. Like a fish that size is very telling. Literally goes not completely out of the water, but its head and half of its body comes out of the water and misses that triple articulated sex dungeon a full year later in the exact same hole. So up to a year later, that fish was still in there. And I know a lot of people that fish this general area, and some people even fish that hole. I'm sure they do. And I never heard of anybody ever catching or seeing a fish anywhere near that size in there. Yet I saw it on a streamer one time, caught the fish, and then a year later went back and moved it on a streamer again. Granted, it was a bigger streamer than most people would probably throw, but the fish was still alive as of a year after that. And then the following year, which I think was maybe last year, I get confused on when all this actually happened, but I think last year I didn't even really try to catch the fish. I didn't even really fish that area much. So the fish could still be alive, but now we're getting to the point where like a fish was 28 inches long at that point is an old trout. And it, anything that at that size, like, you just never know how long they're going to live. It probably is dead by now. So I feel comfortable telling the story, but I'd be lying if I said I'm not going to continue to go past the hole that Poseidon lives in, at least a couple times this year, especially getting into that same time at like that May, June timeframe. You can guarantee you that I will be fishing that hole that Poseidon's in once or twice, because if that fish is still alive, that would be like the most incredible, like, long run of a story of a fish known to man. So anyway, that is the story of Poseidon.
And it for sure probably is over 30 inches by now.
Oh,
if it's still
it's got to be
growing.
Yeah, it's got to be. I would say it's got to be close now. The only thing with like a fish like that is, like, once they get to that size, it's kind of tough to figure out how much more they'd grow lengthwise. It might just be, but I guarantee you, still, I know that fish weight wise would have been my biggest brown. Just like, dude, just lifting it up in that net, like how heavy the fish weighed. I mean, I don't know how much it weighed, but it was by far one of the biggest brown trout that I've ever had the pleasure of fighting. And that video's never gone on YouTube and may never go on YouTube unless I somehow by some miracle catch that fish this year. But yeah, it's just like the story. It's like such a weird story because it's like I did catch the fish, so it should have a happy ending. But then in some weird way, because I didn't measure it and like really get any quote unquote proof of the fish other than, I mean, I have the fight on film, but it feels like unfinished business, even though I did actually technically catch the fish. So it's like, it's a weird one, but yeah, it was incredible. So,
and something else I'll say. So really, sounds like if you had just kept your backpack on, you wouldn't have had any trouble. You would have just held it up right then and there. So really, it's all your fault for not having your backpack on.
So that's the other thing. That's a part of the story. Is the only reason I didn't have my backpack on. I always have my backpack on. But the only reason I didn't have my backpack on is because I had been sitting in that hole for a while at that point. I don't know how long, but I mean, it could have been as long as 30 minutes. I'd been sitting there switching flies. And at that point, I had taken my backpack off and had all my fly boxes out because I was systematically going through flies, trying to see if I couldn't get this fish to eat. So the only reason I didn't have my backpack on is because I was sitting there switching flies. But if you're correct, if I had put my fly boxes away and put on my backpack, then when I landed the fish 2 holes down, I would have just measured it, taken a picture of it, and released it, and none of this ever would have happened. It would have been a different story. So yes, that is also true.
Sounds like you learned a lesson. Don't ever take your backpack off.
Yeah, don't take your backpack off. And if you have a hole in your net and the fish weighs over 10 pounds, do not try to lift it from one spot to the next because it will break the net, and the strength on those fish is absolutely incredible. So that's what I learned out of that.
Well, I guess we'll see. We'll hear if you have any updates on it this year. Although I also doubt it's still there. It could be, but it's just probably not a high likelihood because after try that big, you kind of either have to catch them or they're kind of gone. So
yeah, and the other thing that I found it interesting that the fish was in the same hole the following year. I thought that was a good sign for me to catch it, but as I said, I didn't have as much time to fish that year, so I never really went back and tried really hard. But the other thing worth mentioning is that we've caught big fish multiple year after year after year, and the big fish, although they'll have some home ranges, they do tend to move a decent amount. And that, like, you might catch it, like we've caught big fish like multiple years apart that were multiple miles apart that were the same fish. So the thing is like after 2, 3 years, 4 years, however long it's been that Poseidon, since I hooked and caught Poseidon, the problem with that fish is even though it was in there the next year, that doesn't mean that now, even if the fish is alive, that it's even in the same hole, because there's multiple big holes in that area that fish could take over, like, I mean, there's no reason for it to be in that hole over the other 5 or 6 gigantic holes in that stretch of water. So it's like, yeah, it's such a iffy, like, the fish just can move too much, and it's really hard to pinpoint them, especially like year after year after year. So that's another little tidbit. But I guess now we'll move on to the next story, right?
Yeah, and I was also going to bring up, if you guys ever have any questions about the stories, you can also ask those questions about any of these stories we tell, and we'll answer them in the next podcast too. So if you have any questions for John about how bad he is at fishing, you can tell him there, and we can all talk about it.
Actually, I'm great at fishing. I'm just not good at doing anything other than catching the fish. I landed the fish fine. It was after that it went downhill.
I shouldn't say much because this next story is I mean it's I don't know if it's better or it's probably not. I don't think it's better. So
I think it's worse, and that's why you should have kept your mouth shut, because that's what I'm going to say after you finish your story.
But I know I'm bad at fishing, so.
Yeah, well, I think you're all right. You've already caught one 26-inch brown trout this year.
So my story, it was it wasn't last year. It was the year before last. I'm
yeah, I think it was the last year. Or it was the year before last.
I believe it was the year before last, and this was around May, I believe. And I was fishing a river that, I mean, it's known to have big trout in it. So I was like targeting big trout at this time, just see if I could catch something big. And well, I guess a few mistakes. The first mistake is I kind of wanted to streamer fish, but I was kind of on the edge. So what I ended up doing was I had my Euro rod because I love my Euro rod so much that it just feels so comfortable to me and natural that I really wanted to use my Euro rod just in case I wanted to switch to nymphs like in the afternoon or something. So I brought the Euro rod and I was like, I'll just throw my jig streamer, which if you ever see any of our actual videos we have on the channel, I throw my jig streamer all the time, everywhere. That's like my favorite thing to throw. So I was like, I'll just throw my jig streamer on the Euro rod, which isn't uncommon. Like I do that all the time for big brown trout, and it is good. Like I catch them on it. It's just you don't have any. Well, I guess in her story as well, it was also on your Euro rod too. So you just don't have the control or oomph to really like, I don't know, to really do anything, hit the fish after you hook it. So I was just going down the river here with my jig streamer on my Euro rod, which you can't really cast if you have ever fished with a nymphing rod at all in general. It's tough to throw something heavy on it because the rod's kind of more flimsy. So I was just jerking this around like an idiot, throwing like a heavy jig, like not even like a normal jig streamer, like a particularly heavy jig streamer on my Euro rod. So I was just kind of like not even casting. I was just kind of like throwing it out. I was just kind of looping my line out and throwing it around. And I got to this one hole, and this hole isn't particularly deep. It's just kind of, I mean, it gets decently deep, but it's probably only like maybe 4 feet deep. So it isn't too deep. It's kind of an average, kind of a roughly hole. The current moves through it pretty quick. It has some slower portions on each side of it, or on like each side of the current. But it was always in my mind a good streamer hole because it isn't too deep. Every fish in the run is seeing my streamer just because it is kind of shallow. So the fish aren't like hiding particularly. They're just kind of in there to feed in my mind. So I come to this hole and I've made a few casts up at the head end of it. I haven't seen anything. So I start to work my way down the hole. And I would say like I was about in the middle of the run here, and I make a cast all the way over, hit my jig streamer, and I was just kind of bringing it across the current, and I was like kind of what do you call it, when you
like swinging it?
Yeah, swinging my jig streamer around. And as it got on like my side of the current, I saw something move just behind my streamer, and I was like, oh. And then suddenly I just saw a mouth open up, just slurped in the streamer, and then started to turn away. And like a giant mouth, it just was like whoop, slurped and started to turn away. And as it turned away, it just didn't stop turning. Like it just kept, like it was like a whale, just like from like the start of the head, and as it started to turn, it just didn't stop turning, and I pulled back before the fish was even stopped like turning around. It was still there. It was just giant, and I like, pulled back into it, and it made like two splashes on top of the water, and it looked like somebody released a small like shark in the middle of the river there, and it just started splashing around. Like it was like the whole place just it just started thrashing around. It was huge. It looked like I just hooked like the biggest thing you'd ever seen. And it started thrashing around, and then it kind of controlled itself, and it just kind of got in the current and just kind of started swimming around in there. And I couldn't do anything. Like I couldn't even pull the fish. I couldn't pull it. I couldn't move the fish. No movement at all. I was like trying to pull it towards me, and I was putting as much pressure on that as I thought I could before something was snapping. I don't know if it was my pull, the line, something was snapping if I had pulled it any like harder. And I was just sitting there holding my rod, and I was like, I don't know how to land this fish. Like I'm not making any progress. Like I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here holding it on like on the end of my rod. And then at that time I was thinking, I was like, well, here, and I was just kind of reached down to like grab my net just like so I can kind of see. I don't know, I just like to make sure, unlike John, that I have my equipment. and but I didn't, but then I reached down, I don't have a net. I don't have anything.
So can we time out for a second? Andrew's giving me crap about forgetting my bag up where I was fishing, and he literally forgot the one thing that you need to land a big trout with, while, by the way, targeting big trout. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't great. But so I reached down, I don't have a net, and I'm like, well, I'm done for. Like, I can't, like, it's hard enough to land a big fish, period. Especially, oh, well, I haven't even said anything. I saw it was a rainbow trout too. Like, I saw the pink line in the middle, like, colored up. It was probably just post spawn. I'm guessing it was like May. I saw it like the pink line. I saw it has a rainbow trout, and those are even harder to land because they're so jumpy in general. But so I reached down, I didn't have my net, and I was like, well, I'm done for now. There's no way I can hang the fish. And as I'm thinking this, I'm just holding the rod because I can't pull the fish. Like I'm just like holding it at max pressure, and nothing's happening. Like if somebody was just standing there, they would think I'm just like stuck on the bottom, just staring around. But so I'm like, well, I guess I could just pull the fish up towards the bank and just try and like grab it, because I already like saw it was something massive. So I was like, well, I should be able to like grab the tail maybe if it gets shallower. I'm still screwed, but maybe I can do something. And I was like, okay, well, I'll figure that out as I get there, basically. And I was like, okay, well, let me focus on this fish. And I'm just holding it, and I'm like trying to pull it. I'm not really making any progress. And the fish like is like starting to move some. Like it's pulled my line out a few times. Like I made some small some small runs, but isn't anything like too far. It's been like 10-yard runs at a time. But I'm still thinking, I'm like, this fish could bring me up or down the river like 100 yards, because it was massive rainbow trout, and they're known to make big runs and everything else. But I'm still just holding on to it. I'm shocked at this point I'm still even in the same hole. The fish probably just thought something was pulling on it, like tugging on it. It was like, I don't know what this is, but I don't like it. I probably hadn't even thought about it being hooked yet. So I'm still holding on to it, and then so I'm just holding it, max pressure. I'm holding it, and then I just feel it like just like not even like pop, but just kind of like I'm just pulling the streamer just kind of slowly out of its mouth. It was just like whoo, and just kind of pulled out, and then and then it was just slack. And yeah, at that, and then, well, I'll come back to a few things, but then to make matters just as bad, so after I had, so it like popped off, and I was just sitting there like, my life is over. This is the end of everything. A guy actually came down shortly thereafter, so he could have probably landed it for me if I kept the fish going. So I probably would have been okay there.
And
Um,
and didn't you say that he recognized you too?
I don't remember if he did or not. He might have, but still, I mean, if somebody has a giant fish on, like I would help them
Yeah,
try
yeah.
to
Oh, 100%,
net the fish.
100%.
So I probably would have been covered there. But this fish, I'm not kidding to you. I haven't really explained like the size or anything. It was the biggest trout I had ever seen, and I'm saying like this fish could have easily been like a mid 30s inch fish, like 35-inch rainbow trout, easily. Like I've caught in like, well, and even just recently I caught a 26-inch brown trout, and that rainbow trout dwarfed that brown trout easily. Like it was like a whole class of fish above that. Like it was over 30 inches, no doubt in my mind. Biggest fish I'd ever seen. And I also, and the bad part is too, like I was recording everything too. Like I have the whole clip up to me losing the fish, just like John does with his, but I doubt it ever gets posted too, just because I lost it and I didn't even catch any other fish, I don't think, that whole day. But which is the most massive rainbow trout, and I know how big it was also because I came back up to that hole. Like I kind of fished some more. Then I came back to that hole in the afternoon, and I was like, well, this rainbow trout 100% is still in this hole. Like I fought the fish for maybe, honestly, it was probably only like 2 minutes at most. So it was pretty short time. And so I was like, the fish is still in here. So I was like, well, maybe I can try and nymph the fish. And I started to throw some nymphs in that hole in the afternoon, and I actually caught a few other fish, like a couple like small browns, like I don't know, 15, 16 inches and something. And I was just looking in the hole. I was like, honestly, a fish this big, I should be able to just see it sitting in here. I mean, it was so big that it was like an abnormally large fish to where a fish that big isn't sitting in that hole. Like it would so I was like, I should be able to see it. So I stood there and I was looking, I was casting, and I did. I ended up seeing the fish, kind of spooking it, I think, because I was trying to look for it, and I was kind of edging out like closer and closer towards the middle of the current, and I was casting. I was trying to get some pedo casts on like the far end of the current, and I was casting, and I saw it. I mean, it had to be this fish. I I saw it like kind of spook, kind of move from the middle of the current over to the edge, and I mean, it was like, I don't know, it was just bigger than a fish should be. Like it was like, if there was fish other than trout here, I would think it was some other species of fish that is bigger than a trout, but it was definitely a trout, obviously a trout, and yeah, it was probably 30. It was for sure over 30 inches, but I'm thinking it was probably pushing like 34 to 35 inches, possibly too. And I had it hooked. I had it. I had everything. And John told me afterwards, he was like, "Well, if you just had your streamer rod," and I agree with that, because part of the problem with like the Euro rod in general is when I'm pulling back into a fish, and especially the umph you need to set the hook of a streamer into a trout, like you need more like backbone in your rod, which is the whole point of a streamer rod, to set the hook into these fish. And I just don't think my streamer ever really got hooked in the fish too good, because the time it popped out, like the fish didn't even like move or head shake or anything. Like it didn't turn like the opposite direction or swim up or down. It was just sitting there and it just popped out. So that tells me that it was probably just barely hooked to begin with, and it just kind of slid out. Like I probably just kind of pulled it out.
I was going to add that another thing that happens when you, especially when you get into the realm of like truly giant trout, and I mean, he's talking about a rainbow that could have been 35 inches long, is that the mouth on a fish that's over 30 inches on a trout is truly gigantic and it's bony, like it's hard bone. So like part of the
Yeah.
reason you use bigger rods a lot of times when you're streamer fishing, if you think you're going to catch really truly giant fish, is you want a rod and you want big stiff hooks and you want a big rod so that if a 25 to 35 inch trout does eat, you have the backbone and the ability to actually drive that hook into that fish's jaw. Because if you don't, what ends up happening, which is probably what happened in Andrew's case, is even if he did everything right with the hook set, you can very easily just skin hook one of those trout. And then the problem is, if you skin hook a fish that weighs 15 pounds or whatever a 30 plus inch rainbow trout would weigh, if you skin hook a fish that's that big, just the pure pressure of you trying to move the fish's head can literally pull the hook out of the fish's mouth, which is probably what happened in Andrew's scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it just pulled out, and it was just disappointing because I mean, it kind of like it wasn't even like a fish like even like in John's case, it was like a 28, 29 inch fish. Like that's big, but something that he'll probably see again, like in his lifetime, probably
100%.
several more times. This fish was something like it might have been like that might have been the only opportunity I have for the rest of my life at a fish that big in just like a public stretch of stream
Yeah.
basically. And it was like 100% a wild fish probably. I mean, I don't think there's any stocking anywhere in there, but
Yeah.
it's like a wild rainbow trout. And I don't know, it was just it's just even more disappointing knowing that like that type of fish that's probably like truly like probably be the only time I ever hook a fish that big ever again, unless I go somewhere like extremely special and like and go where that's more consistent. Maybe if we go to like New
Yeah. And
Zealand
like,
or something where you can catch 30 plus inch fish consistently, but for like in the States, it's just, I mean, that's probably the only time.
the other context is like, I know there's a lot of different places where people fish for like lake run fish, even out west. He wasn't fishing in a spot where there's lake run fish. So
Yeah,
he
this
was
was a
catching a fish that was
river-born
river
fish.
born, like, it came from somewhere, maybe down, like maybe it had pushed up from somewhere to spawn. Like that's why it was up
Yeah,
in the area that he was fishing. But likely the fish was born in a river somewhere in the general area and had just grown to that size naturally. I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, who knows what the life cycle of that fish was or why it was so big in that situation. But yeah, it was like a once in a lifetime situation. And not to say that he'll never get another chance at a 30-inch rainbow trout in that area, but he's just not likely to. Like, it's just one of those
yeah.
things where he kind of accidentally ran into a unicorn and just was undergunned, got his butt kicked, didn't have a net. I mean, literally the worst scenario known to man. So,
And I probably would have had better luck, obviously, if I had some nymphs on too,
yep,
because honestly,
100%.
if a fish eats a streamer, especially a rainbow trout, it's would have probably eaten a nymph too, or any really thing that you were throwing in there.
Yep,
So I probably could have just nymphed for it and caught it, and I at least probably could have had it hooked for longer. I'm not saying I would have gotten it in because I probably would have had like 5x on and probably would have snapped me off anyway. But I don't know. Still, it's just a disappointing time. But that's how it is, though. You don't. I mean, most of the time you don't catch the biggest fish, and that's just how
yeah,
it is because they're
unfortunately.
smart, they're big, they're heavy, they're like the biggest fish. You're probably undergunned for it anyway because you're like prepared for big fish, but you may not be prepared for the biggest fish there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I know what you're saying. Like, even if you're set up for a 24 to 26-inch brown, if you hook a 33-inch brown, you're still in for a world of hurt. Because the difference
Yeah,
between even a 28-inch brown and a 30-inch brown or a
could be 10
32-inch brown can be
pounds.
massive. Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
100%. 100%. So, all right, well, those are our two stories for the day. I think we're doing pretty good time-wise. We've been going for about an hour and 15 minutes-ish, a little bit less than that. But
If we can just quickly give some, I guess, details on our next couple trips, and then we'll probably end it off.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up here. So the trip that we have planned, like as soon as I get off this, I have to pack because I haven't packed for it, and I'm supposed to be leaving here in like 3-4 hours. Um, is we're meeting in Tennessee. Andrew's flying out here. We're gonna fish Tennessee for 3.5-ish, 4 days. We're gonna be focusing on some tailwaters because snow runoff and cold weather is being insane right now, and tailwaters are a little bit of a relief from that. Throwing streamers for big browns, hopefully, and also nymphing just to catch some fish because Andrew hasn't really gotten to fish recently, and I have been fishing and haven't caught hardly anything. And then let's see, the next one, I have a trip to Oregon. I'm going to be fishing with my buddy William. And that's going to be an exciting one for me, and an exciting one that I think you guys are going to like because I'm going to be chasing bull trout, which I've never caught. And yeah, I'm just like over the moon excited about my Oregon trip. I'm going in February, so we'll see how it is. But regardless, I've done a bunch of research on this area. William's already been there and already fished it before, and he's already caught bull trout there. So I'm excited. We're going to be spending like, I don't know, I think 3 full days of fishing Oregon is what I'm going to be doing. And then I've got another trip up to Erie to fish for steelhead again, because you guys really like the steelhead videos, and it was miserable when I was up there, so I wanted to go. I'm going to be going in March to Erie to hopefully actually fish it when it's a little bit warmer and actually catch some steelhead rather than just get my butt kicked for 2 days. But I'm going to be doing that with a couple buddies of mine. So we'll probably make a podcast. We'll probably talk about every one of those trips, I'd assume. Just because I'm sure there's going to be a lot going on during those trips that we're going to be able to talk about and laugh about. So yeah, that's the trips I have upcoming. So.
And it always is nice to mix up to like this trip where we're leaving for today in Tennessee. It is I can say Tennessee, right?
Yeah, you can say
Have you already
Tennessee.
said that? Okay.
Yeah.
In Tennessee, okay, you already said it. I didn't know if you had said it. I was like, wait, it was that. In Tennessee, it's just kind of also, it's kind of a change of pace because me and John are always fishing, like we're always like hiking up for miles doing this fishing. So getting to fish a tail water is kind of nice sometimes because we're just in a boat, we're floating, we're just kind of relaxing and just kind of taking it easy almost. Like it's kind of like a vacation fishing trip because we get to like relax. We don't have to walk. We're just sitting there and we're just hopefully catching some big fish. So
100%.
It's kind of relaxing and hopefully it's exciting for you guys. It might not be as exciting as us going to like a small creek and stuff, but it's just as exciting for us at least to fish those type of things too. So
yeah, and we'll still try to hit like a small creek or some smaller water we'll do it on Monday and just try to do something else a little bit, just for something a little bit of a change up. But yeah, as I said, we're kind of just going for kind of a relaxing trip where we're actually catching fish, which is something that neither one of us have been doing recently. So that'll be a good change of pace. Let's see. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe. If you are listening to this on podcast, my goodness, I'm losing my mind. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave a review. I think like a 5-star review is what you're supposed to do. I don't really know. I'll have to do some research on it. I honestly don't even know how I'm supposed to post these. Like I have no idea. So I'm gonna have to learn a bunch of things before this podcast gets posted. But yeah, hopefully I'll be able to have this podcast up and posted here in the following week or so. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. This is kind of like a behind the scenes type thing for those of you who enjoy the YouTube content. And
also this one is going to be slightly delayed, partly because we have a trip here over the next 3 days. But most of these will probably be, we do the podcast and it's like uploaded like the following day. So it's like very up to date with our current stuff. And it isn't like this is being recorded now. It isn't being posted for 3 weeks like some of our actual content is. So it should be very up to date news and answering questions. Basically just a little more current news, I guess you could say.
Current news, and I'd say a little bit more in depth as to what's going on rather than just like the 15-20 minute YouTube video. It'll be like a full on like hour or so of us talking about different stories about what's happened during our trips and stuff like that. So,
and hopefully we can get some cool people on here too. So
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about
for sure.
like conservation efforts even in different areas. So
That's the
you have
plan.
some cool plans, hopefully. So stay tuned, and hopefully our quality isn't too bad this time, but it will improve hopefully. So stick
Yeah,
around for that.
if there's
Hopefully,
any issues, hopefully we'll figure them out as we go. Yeah, as I said, this is all completely new to us, so
I know a few times John kind of got a little glitchy on us, but it should be okay.
hey, listen, you looked a little glitchy to me. I'm hoping that when this is
Oh,
recorded,
really?
it's recorded like on our side. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
recorded separately and not. Yeah,
Well,
we'll
we'll
see.
have to
We'll
find
see.
that out too. So, but
Anyways, if you guys liked it, let us know. And yeah, I guess we'll catch you guys on the next podcast.
fade to music.